The mid-Permian, 275 million years ago, a time when reptiles have fully embraced the land, spreading out with only themselves as competition. In the water, however, things are as competitive as ever. In freshwater rivers and lakes, amphibians have been evolving for millions of years, and in many ways, the Permian is their golden era. Some, like Erypus, do well on land, but all amphibians are bound to the water, and most hunt underwater or close to the surface. On the bottom of one such river are plenty of creatures that look eerily similar to modern ones, such as Rhinochoncos, a microsaur that bears many traits to caecilians and salamanders. It fills a similar role, hunting for tiny prey on the riverbed, though at 20 centimeters long, he himself is low on the food chain. Down here, death often comes in a flash, and as one of the small amphibians casually searches for a meal, he becomes one. Bursting upwards from the mud comes a wide boomerang-shaped skull, and the little amphibian is cut in half by rows of needle-like teeth. Everything in the immediate vicinity darts away as the formerly invisible predator finally reveals itself after over an hour spent completely still. Chomping down on the severed segments of his prey is a Diplocaulus. At a meter long, he's a top predator in these waters. His wide skull doesn't limit his hunting prowess. In fact, it cuts through the water like a blade, allowing him to lay in ambush and blend into his surrounding environment. His large skull also helps with intimidation, making him look a lot wider than the rest of his body is, and he has in the past effectively scared off many would-be attackers by showing off his head. Today he may have to use it again, as he detects something is different about his territory, and after pulling himself out of the riverbed, begins to swim upstream. Using his broad tail, Diplocaulus are efficient swimmers, and though they usually ambush their prey, they can pursue them if the need arises. The male swims close to the surface of the river, as there are no aerial predators larger than dragonflies, and very few marine predators in this area that could threaten him. The sight of a traveling Diplocaulus carving through the water is a common one, as this genus has been around since the Carboniferous, and will continue to the end of the Permian. After a relaxing swim through his territory, the male finds the reason for his departure. Another male Diplocaulus has entered his territory. The breeding season is about to begin, and this male wants to expand his own territory in order to have a better chance of securing a mate. The resident male isn't about to give up his territory without a fight, and moves to engage the threat. Both males move to the water's edge, so that each of them is almost completely out of the water and standing on their legs. They then face each other and point their noses towards the ground, lifting the back of their heads up. This way the males show off the full size of their wide skulls to each other, and since Diplocaulus' eyes face upwards, each one sees the other perfectly. This form of display is meant to show off which of them is the largest and healthiest, and hopefully avoid a fight. Though when Diplocaulus do engage each other, it takes the form of headbutting matches that often lead to injury. This time, however, it is mostly obvious that the resident male is larger than the intruder, though the newcomer stands his ground as the size difference isn't that great. To prove he is serious, the larger male shakes his tail in the water, creating loud splashes to intimidate his rival. Not wanting to get into a fight, the smaller male backs up and pulls his head down in a show of submission. He then begins to turn around, showing that he will return to his territory. The resident male watches the smaller Diplocaulus pull himself back into deeper water and swim upstream. Their legs are able to support their weight on land, but moving around their large skull can be difficult. He considers resting for a while after asserting his dominance, but those plans are cast aside when he detects something large approaching from the land. Running into the ankle-deep water and charging towards the Diplocaulus was a massive terrestrial carnivore, the famous Dimetrodon. The sailback reptile had heard the Diplocaulus' splashing tail and sought to make a meal out of him. The amphibian threw his head towards the water and worked his limbs as hard as he could to get back into deeper water. The Dimetrodon was faster, and just as the Diplocaulus pulled himself below, The predator bit into the end of his tail. Sharp teeth cut through the amphibian's thin skin and cut off the very tip. The Dimetrodon got a tiny bite to eat, but the Diplocaulus escaped with his life, descending into the murky depths. Unsuccessful, the Dimetrodon walked back to the drier part of the swamp, listening out for any other potential prey. Beneath the water, the Diplocaulus settled back into the riverbed. Despite losing a fair amount of tissue, this injury would recover completely with enough time. For now, his territory was secure, and this lowland river system that was teeming with fish and other amphibians was a Diplocaulus paradise. Hello fellow travellers and welcome back. Today we will be breaking down one of the most recognisable extinct amphibians, Diplocaulus. The first remains of this genus were discovered by geologists William Gurnley and J.C. Wilslow in Illinois, and was described by Edward Drinker Cope in 1877. Since then, many fossils of various Diplocaulus species have been discovered in the US and in Africa. It lived for a long stretch of time, starting in the late Carboniferous all the way to the end of the Permian era between 306 and 255 million years ago. It belonged to the Leptospondyle family, and is not only the most well-known member, but also its largest. Speaking of size, though the lengths and shapes of the various species vary, the largest grew to 1 meter in length. Though it's been estimated to have weighed only 4 kilograms, this I find a little hard to believe, as modern giant salamanders can reach over 20 kilograms, so I think a weight between 10 and 15 kilograms may be more accurate. Being an amphibian, Diplocaulus would have been tied to the water, not being able to survive out of it for long periods, otherwise its skin would dry out. For millions of years, Diplocaulus would have inhabited many different freshwater environments, from lakes, rivers and deltas, filling the role of large carnivore. There have been many species assigned to Diplocaulus' genus, some of which have been found to be dubious. So let's quickly go over the ones that, as of recording, are still considered valid. Salamandroius was the first discovered, and is noted as being smaller than other species and having less pronounced articular processes on the vertebra. Magnicornis was described in 1882 and is by far the most common, with over 100 specimens found, meaning that most information concerning the genus comes from this species. It was also named by Cope and is found in Texas and Oklahoma. Brevrostris is similar to Magnicornis, but far rarer and is distinguished by its shorter and blunter snout with longer horns and a smoother edge to the skull. Recurvus was also similar to Magnicornis, and the two may have even lived at the same time. The difference is the tips of Recurvus's horns are bent relative to the rest of the horns and abruptly taper. Finally, Minimus, which was found in Morocco, has asymmetric horns, with the left prong being long and tapering like other species, but the right prong being much shorter and more rounded. This was found on multiple specimens, so isn't a case of crushing or distortion, making it the most unique of the genus. Now, since I've mentioned the skull so much, let's discuss it and its hypothesized uses. We usually see the skull depicted resting in its boomerang-like shape out from the body. It has been suggested that the horns may have had some sort of soft tissue attachment linking it with the rest of the body, or that the horns acted as protection for external gills. Unfortunately, without soft tissue evidence, these are just theories, and so we are left with them for now being large horns. It may have been used for display, to make the animal look bigger and more intimidating to predators or rivals, while also being used to signal their strength and health to potential mates. One theory I've heard repeated ad nauseum is that the head was so wide so that it would be harder for predators to swallow them, which would work for predators that typically swallow their prey whole, like most amphibians and fish, especially if Diplocaulus was still alive while the predator in question was trying to swallow it. This may have helped young Diplocaulus especially, their large wide heads making them an unswallowable meal for more and more predators the larger they grew. This didn't work, however, for predators that broke their prey apart as they ate. We have an excellent example of this involving fossils of Diplocaulus. Several were found together, and they have been eaten by what appears to be a Dimetrodon. The group of multiple juvenile Diplocaulus seem to have buried themselves during a drought, and the Dimetrodon has dug them out and eaten them, including biting through the skull of one. An incredible find that also shows a new behavior for both species. The most recent hypothesis of Diplocaulus' skull shape has to do with how it moved through the water. In 1980, paleontologists Arthur Cruikshank and fluid dynamicist B.W. Skews created a life-size replica of Diplocaulus and put it into a wind tunnel to test if the skull acted as a hydrofoil. To quote, "The results showed that the horns generated significant lift, which would have allowed the animal to rise in the water column of a river or stream quite quickly and easily. Lift was present when the head was parallel to the flow of the water, modeled by air, with lift increasing at the higher attack angle above the horizontal, and only dropping once the head reached a high stall angle of 22 degrees. End quote. Even when the mouth was open, lift was barely affected. Given these results, Diplocaulus may have specialized in ambushing prey from the bottom of fast-flowing rivers and streams, bursting upwards allowing its head to give it lift and not getting buffeted by the oncoming water, so it could easily target prey and snap them up in its jaws. A fascinating find that gives us a better look into the life of an animal that is so ancient. Of course, it could have also swam after prey, as though we don't have a complete tail of Diplocaulus. We do know that it had a tall and long enough tail that it could have curled it around to touch the front of its head. With this, it is suggested that Diplocaulus swam in an anguilliform motion, which is what eels use. So, Diplocaulus, arguably the most famous extinct amphibian, and one of the most successful genuses to survive throughout the Permian era. Its long history in multiple species, not to mention its signature appearance, has made it a common critter in media, from Ark, Jurassic World Mobile, and even The World of King Kong, A Natural History of Skull Island. In researching this beast, it's become my favorite extinct amphibian. But what do you think of Diplocaulus? And for my question of the week, do you think Diplocaulus would mostly stay still and ambush prey, or may have been a bit more of an active hunter? What lesser known extinct creature would you like me to do a breakdown on next? And until then, please like, share, subscribe, and thank you for watching.